To order. Second item on the agenda is approval of the Halloween PMC meeting summary. Do I hear a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second? Awesome. I'll second that. Discussion on that? Commentary? None? Call for the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We will move on to item 3, which is a TMC workshop for RTA Next Development. Mr. Ellis, you are up.
Fantastic. Good morning. You guys hear me okay, or do I need to hold this up? I speak loud enough. Morning, everybody. Good seeing you. Thank you for the time this morning. Wanted to come in and provide an update on some of the activities we've been doing as regards to the follow-up on the TMC workshop that was hosted several weeks ago. Sent out the letter in advance. Appreciate your patience on that. We were scrambling as of even last week, trying to pull everything together, get the discussions with the jurisdictions. Hope the format was acceptable to you and was easy to understand on that. I'll go through it through the various topics, but I'll kind of highlight and summarize what the key points and key interest items are on there, and then can support any discussion or questions you have on that particular aspect of it. So this was a follow-up where several of the items that were discussed at the workshop included suggestions, recommendations, proposals. So we wanted to follow up on that, get with the lead jurisdiction or affected jurisdictions, and make sure we have properly captured everything so that we can in turn update the database information we've got, which in turn will be shared with the CAC. So the first grouping in there was the project revisions, primarily just simply termini adjustments. So you may remember some of the workshop sub-area breakouts. There were suggestions about going to a more major cross street or tying in with another set of improvements that had already been made. So this first bundle of those basically captured all those items where we identified a endpoint that was in a neighboring jurisdiction. So simply we captured that across Drexel Road, Lambert Lane, Camino de Oeste, Ina Road, Thornydale, and Linda Vista. So those were the adjustments we made in that category that we're seeing that was, adjusted with respect to the jurisdiction's concurrence on that. The next item up was a revised scope and cost estimate. And this was handled primarily, I believe, in the south sub area, dealt with the Sonoran corridor, and that group had identified that there would be a funding allocation. So the total cost was included in there to the tune of about $970 million, if I can remember correctly. So it was identified that that would be a $20 million allocation, allow for comp plan updates, so advance right-of-way acquisition for any kind of preemptive type of effort could take place should this project move forward and prioritize. So that was captured in there. We also identified a number of projects. Those were all during the discussion as they were abutting, and they would make more sense to turn them into corridor efforts, particularly as affected Orange Grove, Ina Road. Drexel had 5 of them all kind of back to back, and recognized that that would probably be a more productive value added effort to show those as a single project, not showing that that's how going to be built. We recognize we communicate that, but that this would be analyzed, evaluated, and considered more in that mesh. And then Marianna, Cleveland, and Claw way out in the Dale community. The other items are.
It's just a cold.
I
was going to say, I'm trying to gloss over. If that part was not acceptable, I could kind of read in between the lines on that. So if that was not quite what the county had in mind, we can undo that. The additional clarification, so this came in addition to what was suggested or what the easy adjustments were. We wanted to follow up with the jurisdictions. I'm hopefully, even though this is summarized, hopefully captured and accurately conveyed the intent of those follow-up discussions and those suggestions on the projects. Specifically as it relates to the I-10 improvements, projects 3 and 4, wanted to see those identified and re-added as priority projects. And then also there's going to be follow-up discussion with the jurisdiction for the cross street improvements and the potential scope of improvements and modifications on that. Palo Verde Road as an example, Irvington Road, these were going to be then reestablished as priority projects. Irvington Road is keeping the 4-lane scope. They verified that that needed to be done and that that was the appropriate scope and solution for that particular roadway. You can read the notes on Sabino Canyon on that. It's a combination of maybe some capacity enhancements as well as multimodal aspects of it as well for ensuring that bike and pedestrian and transit aspects are covered. Salreda Road would be re-added as a priority project. recognizing there can be ongoing discussion about in limits and appropriateness on that, but desiring to see that considered as a named priority project. Naranja has been talked about as possibly a continuation of the Shannon improvement. Also, it had also been possibly suggested as a standalone project. So I think there was some aspects we wanted to clarify on that. We can go either way and how that wants to go. So, but it was basically making sure that we captured that set of improvements along there from Shannon over to Ironwood Ridge was properly reflected. And then lastly, an additional project. This came out after the CAC, the last update meeting we had with them, in which the jurisdictions presented and prepared information to share with them, and was kind of given a little bit more summary of the detail information for the projects. One of the members had suggested, thrown out there, recommended that maybe the improvements on Shannon should actually continue further south. And so there's a possible new project there that's on the table for consideration to take it all the way down as a 3-lane section, tie into the improvements that were down around Club Drive and McGee that was done as part of that RTA project, and then extend it and wrap it all the way around to Thornydale where it ties in. So those were the extent of kind of the additional refinements or new suggestions or want to reconsider type of items. The overall cost implications for this, keep in mind, this is not detailed estimating. That exercise is going to come later once we've got the refined list. What we wanted to do in working with the jurisdictions is we recognize that a project that exchanges its limits can't use the same price tag. That would be misleading. So there were 2 things that were identified that came out of the TMC, is making sure that we at least accounted for those additions, as well as recognizing some of these, it's been a couple of years since the submittal. There's cost increases. We want to be respectful of that too. So we tried to break that into 2 different categories on that. Just changing the termini is in the order of about $50 million. We used simply a cost per lane mile adjustment. That's all the time we had, and that was appropriate for this level planning exercise. Jurisdictions bought into that and felt that that was appropriate as well. The inflationary adjustment across the rest of the program results to about $300 million. So we used the ENR magazine, CC&I, same methodology that Jim and I have been working on as associated with the gap analysis. So we wanted to use one tool across all these methodologies. We didn't want to have one exercise, one tool, different exercise, different tool. Recognizing it's got some questions on accuracy. A couple of jurisdictions had mentioned that they're seeing bid prices that are even higher than that. We recognize that's going to be chased out when we get into the detailed analysis as we go forward with the refined list of projects, and we'll tighten up that accuracy. But for purposes here of representing to you what these changes, things that had come about, making sure we at least acknowledge that, that's the overall breakdown of that effort. With that, Mr. Chair, I can support any discussion you want, answer any questions, or go back and clarify anything you think I glossed over.
Thank you, Rick. The only thing that keeps gnawing at me is the accuracy of the cost estimate. Makes me nervous that we are at this point building a program without additional analysis or review. And I recognize the list is not final, but it does concern me that we are talking through these and making certain assumptions, because I can see scenarios where we have larger numbers than what were originally proposed, and then we're going to have to go back to the exercise down the road. And I suspect that it's a pretty serious effort that's going to be necessary for us to come to at least some agreement on what those costs are going forward. I don't want to be wasteful. I don't want to go out and do projects that aren't going to be considered, but man, I got to believe out of 100+ projects that we should start that discussion soon.
Sure. Rick, just a question on this summary that you put at the last. So this is an increase of 300 million from the original estimate, which was when?
So the original projects came in, what was it, summer of, I think, 2020. And then the final list completed was earlier this year. So we had 2 different adjustment dates on that.
So does this get us to 1.8 billion then, if we came out with 1.5 out of the workshop, or is it 1.5 still?
Oh, no, we're significantly. So what came out of the workshop, as it stands today, or I should say what's entered into the system, we're hovering at about 3.4 billion. So those are the TMC recommended projects, and that's the price tag on it. You can skim off roughly about 950 million for the Sonoran corridor to take it down to that $20 million investment level. So we're hovering right around 2.5 with this 350, or the project I'd mentioned of going back on and the new projects, that's up and around 175 to 200 million. So we're ranging in there 2.5 to 3 bill.
Rick, the cost estimates were from 2020.
I think some of them were, we used that as a line, to draw a line in the sand for the inflation factor of when everybody entered a bin, and then the follow-up coming from the other jurisdictions that were earlier this year. So we indexed those to November 2022 as today's dollars, and then just assumed that they probably had done the estimating in the weeks leading up to it, not 2 years prior. That's an assumption on our part.
Repeat that again.
So that the projects that were entered into the system and submitted by the jurisdictions, they came in 2 different waves. We assume that when those were done, they hadn't been sitting around on an estimate that was 2, 3, or 4 years old. So we indexed those times saying, well, that's when those projects came, and that's when likely those price and cost estimates were identified.
What's the year that was based on?
June of 2020, and then January, I believe, of this year.
So I guess what I'm nervous about is we've got, just pick the lower number, 2.5 billion, right? And our goal is about 1.3, as I recall. So it's 1.5, including the 150, right? That we add. My nervousness is we're going to go through all these gyrations. We're going to have to scale back. We know based on that $2.5 billion. And then, oh, by the way, we're going to go back and do the cost estimating, and then we're going to have to do it again. I'm up for the discussions. I'm just nervous that, we're going to build expectation, and we're not going to have that accuracy that I think is necessary for the plan.
Mr. Chair, if I may. So that's fully recognized that this is still planning level. I think the challenge that we're all going to face is that at some point we want to have scope and detailed enough so we can go forward with the cost estimating in a more detailed fashion. So that's the pleasure of the committees. You decide at what point you think you're comfortable, but we had anticipated roughly, I would say no later than March. That's when we engage our consultant to update the cost estimate based on a refined list. Doing that for a $2 billion list is probably not reasonable. What is reasonable, we can have that discussion. I would suggest getting it closer to the 1.5 range or so. That might be more reasonable, but that's fully acknowledged that we have to come back after that and make adjustments again.
But so the point I'm making though is we're not going to come back once, we're going to come back twice.
That's quite possible.
Because we're already at the 2.5, so we got to go from 2.5 to 1.5. And then we're going to do an analysis, and then we're going to probably end up at
Yes, that's
1.9. I come back and do. All I'm saying is I'm nervous about the expectation that it's building as people are starting to see their projects and think, okay, I can live with that. And then all of a sudden it's like, nope, we don't have enough money. We got to scale it back. That's my nervousness of that iteration with the public. It's just my thoughts. I'm sharing them in terms of just the nervousness that I have. Yeah. Well, I think we can start. I would suggest that we start sooner rather than later. And really, if we are at 2.5 billion, then we should really get back to work and try to figure out how to get that. Working with the CAC, what that needs to look like for 1.5. If that's the goal. Again, I'm just thinking about the expectation. Go ahead, Carmen.
Mr. Chair, so what are the steps remaining in the CAC? So I know that they've been exposed to project evaluation tools. So what is that timing? And maybe that gives us a demarcation where we say, okay, once that next step gets concluded, then that's a good point to start, more detailed cost estimating exercise.
Sure.
Sure, if I may, a good question. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. on the other agenda item as well, but I think it's appropriate to make sure everybody has the full picture. So at this point, the intent is for CAC to kind of go through the same exercise as the TMC did by narrowing down the list and then looking at an alignment between TMC list and CAC's list and kind of look at the commonalities. And then at that point, refine the list. So that's the next step in their process. And then ultimately going back to what Mike was saying, that messaging is critical. This is still iterative, going back and forth. And then ultimately at some point between TMC and CAC, there's going to be a list that everybody can look at and nod and say, we like what we see. And then we send that to the board. And then the board says, we like what we see. And then we take it to the next step.
So when do we think we would have that?
We're hoping it goes back to the CAC's exercise, and Tom can chime in on that a little bit more either now or later, that we're hoping that with Tom's leadership, we can get to that hopefully within the next month.
Okay.
Hey, Tom, why don't you, Paul has a comment here, but Tom, you want to maybe weigh in and guide us a little bit? I think you heard the conversation, and
yeah,
again, I'm not trying to be wasteful in terms of expending energy and effort up front that we may not need, but I just think that we have to be clear that this is going to be iterative, and so when we're having conversations about that project list, that's going to change over time. I don't think we have a choice. It's just going to have to.
yeah. Mr. Chairman, there's actually kind of two issues here. One is the project list. You know, what are the actual projects and what do they look like as you refine limits and combine certain projects together, extend termini, as Rick laid out, as you know, some of the questions still to be answered. Those are, I think, bothering the CAC somewhat, to know if you want to rank projects, should we rank them as combined or not? Are they lengthened? And the other part of this conundrum, I guess, is the cost, which you've just now been discussing. And that's the reason that the last time we asked that the individual jurisdictions perhaps take a quick look at their cost estimates and say if they believe that they're still good, or if they want to make a estimated correction in those estimates, knowing that it's probably too big of a hurdle to go do detailed cost estimates and scopes and all that on 108 projects. It makes sense to me anyway that we would wait until we have a manageable number that's relatively close to a draft listing of those projects before we leap into these detailed cost estimates. Updates just off the cuff from the individual jurisdictions now that we're likely to be significantly optimistic, if you will, about our list when those cost estimates are refined. So we might get down to, let's say we get down to 1.1 billion, as the board has asked. And we don't know at this point whether to expect that to come back in at 1.8 billion or 1.15 billion. And so anything we can do in the interim, say between now and March, as Farhad, I think, just mentioned, to refine those estimates a little bit, at least, would be helpful.
Fair enough, Tom. I think I hadn't thought about that as maybe a better second step, which is instead of shooting for 1.5 billion, we shoot for 1.1 billion. And then focus on that as the goal, and then if that leaves a little bit of a buffer in terms of inflation costs or just increases in cost, that might be a better approach. And that way, it's easier to expand than it is to contract. And I'm just nervous about the iteration of the conversation.
Well, that has been my concern too, and the reason I wanted to go to 1.1 billion. But I also understand that if we aren't probably going to go from 2.5 to 1.1 billion in one step, and back and forth a couple times with the TMC is almost surely the best and quickest way for us to get to a joint recommendation on a list.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it, Paul. Thanks for your
Thank you, Sheriff.
patience.
Actually, Mr. McGovern and yourself had a portion of my comment, which was on the expenditure side. I appreciate the memo that we received from the RTA, which outlines the different aspects of the 2.3 billion, and that the main projects are at 1.12 billion. Now, I know with Oro Valley, we submitted ours 2 years ago. I guarantee you those costs are probably close to 50 to 60% higher now than what we originally estimated. What I was going to suggest is that we really need to call the list down, even with today's database, the cost database that we have today, even though we understand that it might not be realistic for today's construction costs. I think it's worthwhile calling down those projects even further to even fit within, say, a $1 billion limit that would give a little bit of cushion, a little bit of conversation room to ultimately fit in the 1.2 or 1.12 billion, which was outlined in the memo. Again, now we have a real target and a real focus. That was part one, and I don't know if this is the right agenda item to talk about the revenue side of the equation here. I have the Eller projections. The original 2006 Eller projections were in the neighborhood of 2 billion. Fast forward 20 years, Eller's projecting us in that same neighborhood of 2 billion. But we have 20 years of inflation, consumer price index. I mean, we're paying twice as much today as we were for things in 2006. That alone, wouldn't that raise a higher amount of revenue with a half-cent sales tax? And then I know we didn't meet projection on population increase, but we have had a population increase since 2006. And I mean, smarter people than me are figuring this out, but it just, my gut reaction to, we're in the same neighborhood with a projection, even though we went through the Great Recession, and we're still coming out in that $2 billion neighborhood for RTA 1. RTA next, why is it still in the same neighborhood? I just throw that question on the floor here.
So I'm comfortable with this conversation continuing. As I look at the agenda item, it is the RTA next development from the workshop, which we discussed in terms of revenues. So I'm comfortable with continuing down the conversation of revenue.
So if I may, again, good question. As you recall, and then Jim can add to my comments. As you recall, we've been all a little bit concerned about how optimistic the initial revenue estimate was. So we've been working with all of our partners to come back with a little bit more conservative estimate. So that's what you see. You see a more conservative estimate. And excuse me, losing my voice. So the range of revenues, you have the pessimistic range, the baseline, and the optimistic. Right. So we've chosen to go with the pessimistic, and that's why in that $2 billion range. So Jim, since I'm losing my voice, put that on.
No, happy to. Yeah, if we opt to go with the pessimistic outlook, basically assumes no relative growth in the tax base, if you will, over the future years. We are in the midst of a shift in our tax base where when you look at disposable income, you're looking at more and more disposable income going to services rather than just goods. Had a real very weird spike as a result of COVID where we shifted that, and that's not the case at this moment in time, but the long-term trend nationwide locally is to continue to look at that shift from goods to services. And we see that resuming after things normalize from recession. We have not, we are on an inflation adjusted basis looking at our tax base is basically what it was back in 2006. And again, partly because, I mean, we have seen an increase in population, but we've seen an increase as a result of that shift from goods to services. So that's why you're not seeing much change in that.
And if I may, since I have my voice back now. So again, that was really a discussion we had with the board, TMC, even CAC. Do we want to be more conservative or do we want to be more optimistic? And I think we want to be more conservative.
That's fair. I understand.
Makes sense at this point. So Tom, coming back to you for a minute. What's the expectation or the goal? And I know you're on the agenda next item, but maybe you just walk us through with regard to RTA Next. What's the goal for the CAC in terms of the dollar amount that you're shooting for, if you are?
Yeah, I've told the group that 1.1 billion in 2020 dollars essentially is what our next goal is. And if, as I said before, it would be helpful if any of those even gross level estimate refinements could be provided to us, just so that we have a better chance of alignment with TMC and with the budget and can reduce the number of iterations.
Okay. So I would suggest then that all the agencies dust off those estimates again. So Jim, if you could send out a note to everybody just asking them to do the exercise again, just to make sure. And I think, Tom, your points are good ones. And if we can help with giving them at least as best we can today, we don't have, I think as agencies, the estimators, like full-time consultants that we're going to get in March, but at least to double check to see if there's anything that, Paul, to your point, they were years ago. And man, if we're seeing that kind of escalation in cost, and we've got some real serious challenges coming forward. In fact, even if they go up 20-30%, those are big numbers when we're talking, actually over $2 billion.
Mr. Chair, I can just say, because I run the projects as well for the town, we're seeing upwards of 40% over the past 2 years on construction cost inflation.
Okay.
I know there's different materials and different, labor rates, and it's cyclic, but overall, things are a lot more expensive right now.
Okay, so we will definitely ask everybody to go back and dust off their estimates and make sure that at least one more chance, because Tom has his work cut out. I think you're in a good space there, Tom, if you can get them down to 1.1, that would be great. We've got all the confidence in you in the world there, Tom, to get that down to 1.1. Miracles.
One quick question. Do you want us to, I want to go back to the jurisdictions. Do you want us to ask for the updated cost estimates on the projects that are currently recommended by the?
I think so. I would suggest, ask for all of them, but my gut would be ask for the updated cost that Tom's looking at more closely. And then it's up to the jurisdiction if they want to do more than that. But I would say that those that are under consideration should be the focus like that.
Excuse
Okay.
me.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Chair. I didn't quite catch any follow-up from Rick's questions as to whether you as a group have been able to confirm his assumptions about, combining of.
We're losing them, but if I may, Mr. Chair, I think I understand the question.
Hey, Tom, maybe you could turn your camera off. Maybe you'll get a better connection because you're breaking up quite a bit. or not?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I think I understood the question. The question was, what are we gonna do? with
projects,
this
extending limits,
coordination
et cetera. And that information,
Okay, if I may again.
You may.
So as far as we're concerned with this coordination, it's individual jurisdictions' pleasure. They've updated their information, the ones that have combined projects. What you have in your memo, that's good. We're gonna update all of our data with that information moving forward. I believe that was the question.
I'm not following though, what.
So the question was, after we followed up and coordinated, for example, Oro Valley's project, they decided to combine or adjust or maybe
Right, we did the same with the
extend.
county and.
So that information coming from Oro Valley is going to be updated in the portal, so everybody now has the most recent information.
I thought we had already agreed to do that.
Yeah, this was just obtained within the last week or so. So
Well,
this-
but Tom's asking for an answer and I'm not sure.
I think that was a question
Oh,
he
okay.
had, that what are we gonna do with it? We're gonna update it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the staff answer. then.
Yeah.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, we're gonna have to work together as jurisdictions as well, because like for the two projects that we have left, both of them extend beyond Oro Valley, so we'll need to get together with our partners.
Please feel free to do that and keep updating us if there's any tweaks. We want to make those tweaks, but at some point, we're going to have to decide that we're not making any more changes. I would suggest let's do that sooner than later.
yes, so would I.
We can hear you now.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yeah. So Tom, I'm not sure if you heard that, if I may, Mr. Chair. So we'll update all the information based on the coordination with all the jurisdictions. So you'll have all that as of early next week.
Yeah, that was it. Thanks, Farhad.
Thank you.
It's just have that portal be realistic as far as projects that the committee should be ranking.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just one particular one. Rick, maybe on the further clarifications, you talked about Sabino Canyon Road going from county to city. And I mean, it sounds to me like there's still an open question there, but I recommend we assume the widening project, the city perhaps will want, and the county says they'll support it, is what I'm reading, I believe. So we got a higher cost estimate rather than the lower one, and then find ourselves in a hole on that one already.
I think that was our intent, is to keep it as is, recognizing that that one may, if it surfaces out as the top choice, if that comes up, then we'd inject this additional information with the CAC and with Tom and his team to, hey, there's a discussion about this. What do we want to do with that?
Yeah.
But recognizing what's been submitted, I think that was the point that was confirmed, is the county views it and says it's really back at the intersection area. The primary need from their perspective is in the multimodal aspects of it. We're open to keeping it, but recognizing the primary driver on that is kind of more concentrated at that one particular area. So, and I think to Tom's point, we'll be working with him for Monday and the future meetings on that to share this information, so that as those projects come up, hey, Drexel Road surfaced as a top choice. We've identified that there's a partner or pairing or companion projects to it to make a full corridor. So we'll make sure that that information is at least verbally shared, talked to, while we're making the database updates as well.
Mr. Chair, if I may again. So I just want to, on that point, I want to acknowledge staff. Definitely all the jurisdictional staff have been very helpful, responsive, and answering those questions on a very quick turnaround. So I appreciate them doing that. We'll continue that exercise with the updated cost estimate. So my hope is within the next couple of weeks, we'll kind of cross the T's and dot the I's and answer all those questions.
Let me just, the conversation is making me nervous for this reason. If the total number of projects, or the dollars associated with projects that we have now, are 2.5 billion, which is what I heard you say earlier, did that ballpark? Just pick a number in that
Ballparkish, yeah.
That's fine, ballpark's fine. If Paul's correct that the costs are 30 to 40% greater, and if we assume, a 30 or 40% increase That's over $3 billion. Okay, it's great. Tom has to pick one out of every three projects. That's what we're talking about here. That's why I'm saying, I think we've got to pay attention to that because, you know, we're all shopping these lists and we're having this conversation like, you know, hey, we got a game plan and I think we're a ways from that yet. That's what I'm wondering.
Workshop.
Tom, I'm not speaking for you. I'm just, you know, no. I Jen was just saying, do we need another workshop? Here's my gut. You know, if in fact, you know, we had over 4, right, and we got it all the way down to we thought, you know, almost 2, 1 point, whatever it was. But I'm just, if that's the number, think about that for a minute. If Tom's at 1.1 billion, that's his goal, and with inflation or with escalated costs, we're at 3 billion. That's 1 out of every 3, right? So I'm just, yeah, I mean, that's going to be really hard. What I'm thinking of is the CAC is going to be tasked with whittling that down. And I think that's going to be that's a tall order. That's a tall order in my opinion. I don't know. Is it just, I'm trying to do simple math here, but it just seems to me that we may want to rethink that a little bit.
I would say it depends really upon when you submitted your projects too. I know City of Tucson, you submitted them recently.
Right.
Are those, that's a big chunk of
They
the
were good
projects.
then,
They were good. Okay.
just like yours were good then.
Yeah.
You know, but pick a number, right? Even if it's, say it's 2.5 billion and it's 2.6 billion, just for round numbers, that's still it's more than half that we're going to have to cut out in order to make that 1.1 billion. That's all I'm
So
saying.
if I may, I suggest, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just say, Mr. Chair, I think, was muttering to you, I think it's too big a lift to ask CAC to handle. So I'm wondering whether it's us at another chop at it, or is it a TPC exercise? It was them to take a chop at looking at this, but I think that we need one more pass at whittling these back down, I think, and it's still going to be too big. And then that's a good opportunity for CAC to come in, but this is too heavy a lift.
I think it's just getting to be a little, we're absolutely confident in you, Tom, but we're also realistic that that's a big lift. So go ahead, Fred.
I was just gonna say that CAC is in the middle of that exercise. I would say let's wait and see what they come back with and then have that conversation. Again, like you said, we have confidence in the CAC folks being able to narrow it down to, but to what point, let's wait and see.
Then we figure out the next pass.
Yeah.
Go ahead, John.
Just one point, Mr. Chairman, since we're talking about focusing on cost estimates by the jurisdictions, et cetera, we should also reaffirm their priorities. I mean, they could change if you're starting to say, you got 20 projects and now you got 10. Are they the same list, you know, in order? So I'm just suggesting we reinforce the priority.
That's a great point. And this past week, there was a conversation with my council, and at least one of the councilmen was very unhappy about no projects in the ward, which makes it hard. You know, so we're going to be having that discussion internally, which could affect prioritization of the agencies.
So
And that's real. I mean, that's a real issue that we're going to have to deal with. So I think it's good. It's a good suggestion.
So again, along those lines, that opportunity is open. Everybody has submitted their priorities. They can change that, update that. But again, same thing. At some point, we would like everybody to say, this is our final list. So feel free to give us updates as we go. But I would include it in our memo with cost estimating to also update your priorities if you wish.
I think, just to be clear, I think it's final till it's not final.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the reality. And as this ebbs and flows between now and when that package is ready for the voter, there will be ebb and flow. It just has to, I think, in order for us to be successful.
Well, and Mr. Chair, just to what you just commented on, I think is we've known it, there's a little bit of an art, not just the science, right? That we may have all the priorities, but if it comes back and it doesn't have a little valley, it doesn't have a chunk of the city, that's just not realistic. We're going to have to go back and tweak it. Part of the board's job.
Yeah. And again, I want to acknowledge what the CEO, Tom has his hand up as well.
Go ahead and finish.
I just want to acknowledge what the CAC is doing. I think they're really on a good path. So really want to make sure that we give them an opportunity and see what they come back with.
Go ahead, Tom. Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I did. I just wanted to give the chair an opportunity to withdraw his full confidence in the CA, given this conversation.
Denied. That full confidence will stay forever. I appreciate you, Tom, and I would echo Farhad's comments. I think the CAC has a tough job, tough road there, and leadership you and Carolyn and others are providing is really invaluable to us, but also to the region. I think you guys are doing amazing work there. So we're going to continue to support you. So we've got some action items for the jurisdictions. We'll make sure we get cost estimates updated as best we can. Also prioritization, we'll revisit that. And then we'll come back at our next meeting with that, or at least by then, hopefully we'll have that. Hey, Tom, when are you going to have your list whittled down? I mean, do you have a goal in terms of, I know it's the end of the year, but what, do you have a date at this point?
Yeah, the hope is that we can finalize this initial list, if you will, the one to come back to you by the end of the month or our first meeting in December.
Okay.
So we still have a lot of work to do to get to that, and we'll do absolutely the best we can. But I would hope to have something in your hands in December that you can react to and kind of confirm priorities and that sort of thing.
It may be of value for us, because all of our schedules are really tight, for us to start thinking about an extended workshop in December to look at that, and if not, maybe in January. Trying to be respectful of everyone's time. Maybe we plan it ahead of time so that we can get everybody together and start thinking about that. So thanks, Tom. I appreciate it. Anything else on that item? I think we've got our marching orders there.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to make sure that I clarified what the board has asked us for, has asked the CAC to provide their initial draft list by December. They meet December 8th, I believe. And, I'm still not clear as to how we can get another iteration with the TMC prior to that point. So it's possible, I can imagine, maybe Farhad can help with this. It's possible that you and the board might look at that draft, master list, if you will, at the same time. I'm just not really clear about how we're going to fit in another iteration before the board wants this list in hand.
Yeah, so a great point. I think if you can get it down to 1.1 billion, we're done, right? So we don't have to do another iteration. So it'll make it easier on all of us, Tom. So that's that. But I think Jan and my point here and others is really to try to help. And so if there's a way that we can help in that process, we're available to do that. And if the timing doesn't work, well, it doesn't work. But that's really the offer. It's not any more than having to do an iteration. It's really just keeping that in the back of your head that there's an opportunity.
Yeah, and again, just thank you, Mr. Chair. Tom, just for your benefit and everybody's benefit, obviously, we're looking at a target of July 23, and along the way we can make adjustments. Ideally, it would be good to have a list by December, but if we need to adjust it, I'm sure that's obviously benefit to the process.
Mr. Chair, in this, I'm in full agreement with this culling down exercise. But do we want to put some rails on this for the jurisdictions? Because as one of the smaller jurisdictions, right now, I inflated my cost 50%. We're still at only 4.5% of the total 1.12 billion, which reflects the size of Laurel Valley. What I'm worried about with the smaller jurisdiction, that we might get pushed to the side, and then we have a voter block that what's in it for us then. And for the success of this, do we want to start maybe maybe introducing some rails for jurisdictions to try to stay within. And for them to be able to prioritize their projects as well, to kind of come at it at all angles.
Thoughts from the group?
If I may respond to that, if you recall that conversation, at the board level is to really make sure that everybody is happy with what they see. So that's really my definition of let's put something out there. Everybody will step back and look at it. Hopefully everybody acknowledges that they're happy with what is coming forward to them. So I would leave that conversation at the board level to say, we like what we see. If they don't, then they'll come back to us and say, go keep working at it.
I just comment, that's part of it. What I see is the art part of this. If we don't have anything in Oro Valley, or we don't have anything in Marana, we've not done our job.
So, and if you remember 2 or 3 meetings ago, Jan made I thought an excellent point. Yes. An excellent point. Right to stay on, where it was really the suggestion is what are the needs of the region first? Let's all try to figure out without the jurisdictional boundaries necessarily put into the mix there. And then afterward, overlay the jurisdictional boundaries and then start to look at the art part of that. And so I'm not suggesting that putting rails on is a bad idea necessarily, because I think ultimately we may need to. But I think if we can continue down the path, my nervousness would be doing that now when we know we have potentially half of the projects that are even going to get on the list, and we're going to waste a bunch of energy and effort in that. I would say let's just keep going down the path. Then we'll come back and then we can make a recommendation to the board based on that. And hopefully there'll be enough of a sprinkling out there where folks, it will resonate with the agencies and ultimately the voters. Anything else on that agenda item? Thank you, Rick. Appreciate it.
No, I want to echo Farhad's statement. Appreciate your staff, many who are in here today, really came through on that and appreciate all that.
One of the things that we talked about last time was some meeting minutes for the 22nd. So that would be helpful if you could.
Yeah, so that's in your packet. And again, actually, if anybody's interested, we do have video clips of the report out sessions. We can forward that to you as well. It's reflected on the document itself. So if there's any other questions about that, I'll send the video out if anybody wants to look at the videos and let me know if there's anything that you like to add.
So I think from my perspective, it would be of value to have that as a formal meeting summary. As an action item, so I would suggest that maybe at the next meeting we have that as a meeting summary.
You can do that today. It's in your packet.
Are you all comfortable with that now, doing that? If you are, then I would entertain a motion. If you'd like to wait and the next time, happy to do that too. What's your pledge? So one of the things we discussed last time, John, was we didn't have a meeting, so we didn't have any meeting minutes from the workshop. And so we had suggested bringing it back as meeting minutes. This presentation from Rick was sort of that. There is some information in the packet. And so all I'm asking is, are you comfortable with that as the meeting minutes? We should take action on that, or should we bring it back more formally with a meeting summary that's agendized and then do that? What's your pleasure?
Mr. Chair, I think bringing it back in one complete package helps for clarity down the road so that we're not trying to piece together different components. So that would just be my suggestion, but if somebody wants to move it.
I don't think there's any harm in doing that. It's my gut. So if the committee's okay, then why don't we agendize it next time? It'll be on the agenda or meeting summary with the, just like a meeting, right? Meeting summary with the video clips. You mentioned the video clip and that.
So I just want to add to that. So we'll have those timestamps to the videos attached to the summary because there was a lot of discussion back and forth. We can't do it verbatim. We'll try to do our best, but that would be our approach.
As a constituted meeting, we needed to have some record of it. So very good. We will have that on the agenda next time. Tom, did you have anything else from a CAC report? It is on the agenda, giving you some space. Did you have anything else that you wanted to report to the group?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I think that I had a chance to kind of voice the issues that I thought were going to be most helpful to the CAC moving forward. So I'm good with that.
Thank you, Tom. Anybody have questions for Tom or anybody else? Rod, did you have something?
I do. I've been struggling with what part of the agenda this should be. So I want to just bring this up in terms of estimating projects and such, and specifically in terms of ADOT's role, because I think ADOT is unique compared to the other jurisdictions. The other jurisdictions are submitting whole entire projects, whereas ADOT is submitting projects with the expectation that they won't be funded 100% by the RTA. But we've yet to have this discussion about what percentage of the funding would be RTA, what percentage would be state block grants, and what percentage would be other types of funding. So it's a struggle. We've got a large dollar value posted or to be looked at in this program. And for us, I can update the estimates fine, and we'll take our DCR and we'll update the estimate, move it from whatever it's currently, I think 1.2 billion for the entire thing, and it'll end up somewhere, just a guess, 1.5, whatever. But what percentage of that would be a reasonable discussion for the RTA to assist fund? Is it a project by project discussion? That really has to be introduced, I think, somewhere in this topic. It came up when I was doing my presentation to the CAC, and I haven't heard of any opportunity to have that discussion with this body or even educate the CAC on how they can walk through that discussion. So I wanted to put that out there and get some thoughts.
Excellent. I'm going to go ahead and reopen then item 3. I already moved on, but I think that's probably the appropriate place to have that discussion because it is RTA Next Development and our workshop, which was all part of it. Rod, maybe you can walk us through, just a second, Rod. Maybe you can walk us through. So there, it sounds like there's a couple things. One is the update to the cost estimate for the project or projects. And then the other is, we'll call it a policy conversation around funding, some percentage of that with regional or local dollars. Is that right? That the issue there?
Sure, I can update you on what our current process or what our plan is for updating the entire ADOT program that was submitted. Because it is considered by the feds to be a major project, we have to do a financial plan. So we're planning on having that financial plan done in the early part of this coming year. We're waiting until we get a consultant on board, and we're down to that final process now.
Calendar year?
Calendar year. So, after January, I expect to have that done, which is why I was wondering about the timing of the estimates. It sounds like we might not have ours ready, and I might have to go a different path to get that updated, which isn't necessarily a challenge. In terms of funding, it's a board, RTA board is the one that decides the funding of ADOT projects in the RTA region. The money is a pot of money. And where it's put, ADOT makes suggestions as the operator and organization that maintains that system. We make suggestions about where those funds should go and what should be upgraded and what should not be. And that's what we put forward in our plan. The ultimate decision is done by the PAG board to move that forward. And then it's really just moved forward by the State Transportation Board. And that's the process.
Rod, is there outside money outside of that allocation from that PAG is given? Is there external money that's brought to the game, if you will, to accomplish those projects?
In the past, there's been several projects. Most of the projects we've built over the last 10 years have had additional RTA funding.
The RTA, I'm talking about, not RTA, not.
Occasionally, there could occasionally be state funding. I've never seen it specifically allocated for larger projects. It's typically just those block grant projects and such, just that HERF funding.
Thank you for your patience as
okay.
because I'm just curious. Is the allocation that you referenced, is that a fixed allocation? Or is that a function of the projects or need of the region? So in other words, not the RTA money, the state money that is allocated to PAG for distribution for ADOT projects. Is that a fixed amount on an annual basis?
It depends. It's a revenue, federal funding, first of all, that comes through and goes through the Casa Grande Accord calculations where it comes down. Then it's a fixed value to be spent in the entire region, not by project. So each year it gets updated. So that value changes annually. And then it goes through the process for funding.
It goes what?
Through the TIC.
Oh, tip. Okay.
Process for funding.
Got it.
So if I may put it in perspective, so the question was obviously posed to all of our partners, identify projects, and then also identify the amount of RTA funding you're requesting and the amount of non-RTA funding you can bring to the table. And recently we sent out another memo asking everybody to confirm if there are any non-RTA funding that you want to propose on individual projects. ADOT was the only entity that identified non-RTA funding for the proposed list of 108 projects. So that's why we're having this conversation, because if others are willing to bring non-RTA dollars to the table, we'll maybe include that in the memo again as a reminder. But ADOT is in a unique position because they want to start planning out these non-RTA dollars now instead of down the road. So I think that's the challenge that I think through this process, we'll be able to answer that question. Once we narrow down the list of projects, once we identify which projects are going to make it into the RTA plan, then again, you can step back and say, to complete X, Y, and Z project and leverage RTA dollars for non-RTA dollars. That's what you propose to do as an entity. And then we'll have that conversation with everybody at the table. And then that's kind of where the overlap comes in. If everybody at the table agrees those non-RTA dollars could be committed on those projects, then that becomes essentially a recommendation to the board.
Let me ask it maybe a little differently. So the dollars that you speak of, the PAG dollars that are allocated from the state and the feds and whatever the pot is, spits out a dollar amount. Those dollars we should be able to project out, and I think are projected out at least on a 5-year horizon, correct? Right. Okay. So given that, then the ADOT project need list that's part of RTA is put into that pot. And then there's some, we'll call it shortfall, that is identified, which would be a potential, I'll use the term responsibility, but an allocation from the RTA to make those ADOT projects whole. Correct?
That's a fair assessment, but what we don't know is, first of all, that's a 5-year look.
Got it.
You're trying to do a 20-year plan. So that's the first challenge. We can't go out that far. If you're going to be relying on those local or those PERF funds to project it, if the region desires to have specific projects at specific timeframes, that can be modified in 10 years by a future board. If it's put in the program now, it's now a voter decision, no matter what the funding is, and it's in that program and it now has to be met. Number one. So there's that whole funding process where we might have a shortfall, like you were talking about, how much. There's also the third aspect of it, which is local contributions and local needs. So for example, if a project has a scope, we have a complete DCR for the projects that have gone in. But suppose there's some local desires that are not in the scope of the DCR. Those could be funded through RTA as additional funding, because ADOT's going to struggle coming up with the funding on that, because we've already brought these projects to the public, got public approval through our DCR process, and this is our scope of work and this is our footprint. Beyond that is a struggle for us to do, both financially and in terms of meeting our NEPA requirements. So if, for example, there's a transit need that the community is looking at, where they project to have something, they, you know, in 10 years, they project they might have a light rail going down this aspect. If we're going to be doing a bridge out there in the next 3 years, we might want to consider making that bridge deck wider to accommodate some kind of future need in 15 years for a transit use. But if it's not built now, it's going to be a struggle in 15 years from now. So those are the types of issues that we have to look at in terms of that. Plus, there's also the aspect of crossing, and you know, all of our issues are connected. We have issues with connecting the community from one side to the other side. We need to talk about addressing those issues as well, and how we're going to address those. So I just want to put that out there as
No,
a
it's-
potential RTA need.
No, that's great. That's really healthy. So it would seem to me that we do need to project out, we'll call it the ADOT dollars, the PAG dollars for 20 years. I know you can't, right? But you multiply for it, you know, 5 years times 4, and boom, you got a 20-year plan. But my thought there is that needs to be a conversation with the voter if we're going to expect dollars from RTA to be put into that pot. So that has to be baked to some level, to a level that would then identify, you know, because I hear you. It started off with what's the contribution of the allocation, right? Well, that can be a fixed amount. That amount can be fixed. We can say to the voter, it's going to be a 15% or a 20% or a 50% match, whatever the number is. But we can also say this pot of money is corded off and for ADOT projects. But I think it's going to be a tall order to say to folks, it's going to be put into the pot without having the definition of what those projects are. And the only way to do that is to do the calculation and do the projection of what those needs are 20 years out, so that they can be aligned. Is that what I'm?
Yeah, I
Hearing
think that's
you
a
say?
reasonable method. And I think that financial plan that we're required to do as part of our, you know, federal
Yeah.
is the tool to do that. So my concern is just the timing of getting that
Getting
done
that ready to go.
yeah, because we'll get that, hopefully we'll get all that information you need, and all that information this body needs will be in that, so that they can make that decision. It'll be a public document and, you know, shared and so on.
So it's,
Hold on a second. I think Carmine has something. I'll come to you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just wanted to ask, do we have any data that shows on the current program, the current RTA program, and for those ADOT projects, what percentage of the total project cost came from RTA, so that we have a ballpark starting point for a conversation on what that amount needs to be going forward, or may need to be?
Very good. Go ahead,
so if
Barbara.
I may, that's what I was just gonna bring up. The current plan has projects identified that are ADOT projects. And then there is RTA funding allocated to those projects. Even back then, it was more of an art than a science. Which projects are the priorities to the region, which projects you want to include in the plan. And it was typically later in the process when we refined the list, had a cost estimate, and then those decisions were made later. So going back to Rod's question, yes, we will get to that point, but needs to happen hopefully in that later time frame when we have better cost estimates that we can make those decisions. And then I want to clarify another point, that what Rod is talking about is the ADOT portion of the funds that come to the region, not the non-ADOT portion. So if you look at the current RTA plan, it says federal funds, X, Y, and Z. So those are decisions that need to be made as well. But all of that can come later. I appreciate you bringing it up, but I don't think we have enough details on individual projects to have that conversation. It goes back to a refined list again. Once we have a refined list, a refined cost estimate, then that conversation can be had, and obviously cross the T's, dot the I's at that point.
You just request to see on the current program.
Yeah, we can
what
send
the
out.
percentage of different funds are allocated to those ADOT
Yeah.
projects, so that we have a framework in which we're having these conversations.
Of course, I just don't want to put out that misconception that there was a formula. There was no formula. It is what it ended up being.
Understood.
But I also think, you know, to Rod's point, if I'm understanding, we need to define that sooner rather than later. Just because from a planning standpoint, going forward, we need to know what that investment is gonna be. Go for it.
And I was gonna extend that. I fully hear what Rod's saying with ADOT, and I think that extends to all of us. I know for my projects, I actually have impact fees that are already in our IIP that are designated for these projects. And as part of our re-estimating, I think all the jurisdictions need to address their portion, their local match revenue. Because that's going to paint the little bit more accurate
So we'll
picture.
make that request again as part of this memo. We have made the request before, but please, yes, do that.
I would, go ahead, Rob.
So I would like to also bring up another point that there are jurisdictions that have put in projects that are on our system that we have not put forward as projects. And I'm not trying to, they're perfectly valid projects if the jurisdiction wants them. We just don't have the level of estimate information and such, or design concept reports necessarily for those areas. Thank you for
No, it's
bringing
good.
this up. This
Yeah,
is
I don't-
something
Good
I can-
conversation. I would suggest that for our next meeting, that we have a separate P, I mean, it can be under RTA next development, but we have a much more robust conversation about this, because how much of the 2.5 billion is part of the ADOT match, if you will? I mean, all of a sudden it gets thrown into the mix, and we need to make sure that we're paying attention to that so we don't paint ourselves in the corner.
ADOT, originally the ask from PAG was to keep your project list to 600 million.
So the match is 600 million?
That's what the ADOT's ask was from the RTA. Our projects are worth 600. So that's like saying that's a large chunk.
So that means if that's if that's the ask, and I don't remember your projects exactly, but was there an assumption on your part that there would be other ADOT funds allocated to those projects?
Yes, the assumption was made
So it was
always.
so it was big, so it's much bigger than
Right.
600 million. If that's just a
Correct.
fraction.
Correct. I mean, our projects are typically 100 million each.
Why don't we do this? My suggestion is the next discussion we have on this to bring up, and let's delve into the ADOT plan more specifically and in detail, so that we can have an understanding of what that component looks like for us to be planning.
Mr. Chairman, I guess where I thought Carmine was going is perhaps, Rod should go back and think about what if the RTA next gives me as much as the RTA one did? And how does that limit my list?
Oh, I see.
Just as one option, you might as well, because that should be perhaps a worst case scenario for you, I think.
Yeah, good thought.
I think, Mr. Chair, I mean, similar to the discussion about the other elements, right? Categorical elements, and the RTA board said, use RTA as a starting point for RTA
For next
next,
time,
right?
yep.
Just to see where does that line fall? And then obviously there has to be a lot of discussion and refinement, and things may have significantly changed or may not have. So just to orient ourselves around a point or a line to say, where do we move from here?
Rod, are you good with that being ready next time to maybe go through that?
When would be next time?
Next
Next
month?
meeting is scheduled for second Wednesday of December at 9 o'clock.
Okay, so the ask would be really to look and find out what the RTA, previous RTAs or existing RTAs funding was for all of our ADOT projects. And I think Jim should be able to get that. from-
Yeah, that's the easy part. The really, in my opinion, the question to hopefully try to answer is, what are priorities for the region, and is the region willing to provide that additional RTA funding, and how much non-RTA funding is coming to the region?
So I think RTA or ADOT can only present what we think is the priority for the region. And then it's up to the board and the RTA to decide
Yeah.
that. And then we can take the funding that was used previously, and we can try and apply that to the priorities that we think should be done, and I can share that.
So I'm gonna go on a limb here and suggest that the priorities that are established in the RTA plan for funding will become the priorities for the region in the ADOT, or in the ADOT PAG component of the TIP.
Yeah,
So
it's
whatever
just-
we come up with now will ultimately become that priority going forward, because that's what we're gonna take over. So I think that the board will have opportunity to weigh in and ultimately make a recommendation or a decision on it. That would be presented to the voters. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. I think it's a function of us relying on your assessments of the needs. My God. All right, for next time, we'll have that discussion then.
Definitely. If I may add on that point again,
Yep, go ahead.
thanks for bringing it up, and that's a good conversation to have, because the questions we keep getting is that, well, should any RTA funds be spent on state facilities? And I just want to make sure everybody knows that the current plan had RTA funds on state facilities, and the future plan can surely have RTA funds on state facilities.
And that's the-
It raises another question.
It doesn't raise a question. I'm sorry.
no, go ahead, please. No. I just, go ahead. Go ahead.
I just want to, because I've had this conversation with the CAC and I got some pushback from the CAC. And I was a bit puzzled by it. I mean, ADOT has been a regional partner in PAG since its inception. And we've worked with all the regions, or all the jurisdictions in the regions, to develop many projects that are vital to just this region. And we do that across the state with many other MPOs. And each one operates independently with the approval of the region that is in, and they decide the funding and where it goes and so on. So it is really all the funding in the PAG region perceived to be done by ADOT is actually done by PAG and the region. So you make the decisions, and the PAG board makes the decisions about where the funding goes. Just want to put that out there, because there seems to be a misperception about that. I'll get off my high horse now.
I was gonna ask somebody to take that soapbox away. Hey, Rod, I don't think you're gonna get pushback, at least from us on that. I'll speak for the city. I think the recognition of the value, not only of the partnership, but quite frankly, the value to the region of the program. It's hard when you're doing mainline improvements, but at interchanges and stuff, and we've been on you all about, Keno and a variety of other things. I know the county's been talking about Country Club. Those all benefit the region and benefit us locally. So you're not going to get pushback. I think it is a misperception that there's this golden goose up in Phoenix that sprinkles dollars out for ADOT. But we'll help with that. The reality is the dollars are finite. And I think that our focus really needs to be, okay, how best to invest those dollars, whether it's the regional allocations or the RTA match to maximize the value. It's really, in my opinion, that's simple. Thank you, Rod. Appreciate it. Okay, so that takes care of items 3 and 4. Is there anything from Baki that needs to cover? We already talked quite a bit about
I
the
think we're good on
plan
number 5
development.
as well.
5,
We're
is there any
good.
reason to get into that?
No, we're good.
Okay, on 6, Jim, anything on that you wanted to?
Mr. Chair, members of the TMC, this is our ongoing discussion of concrete issues. As you know, at the last meeting, we gave a rundown of where we felt we were financially through the end of the RTA based upon the most recent financial projections that we received. We looked at them from one of the more pessimistic outlooks in terms of both the RTA revenue and the 12-6 revenue that really are probably the 2 most significant components of our program. And so it's a very conservative outlook. We have also looked at it with respect to the project costs, and we have ongoing conversations with jurisdictions about what we think the project costs are going to be. We acknowledge that there have been 4 projects that have either been deferred or delayed. And we think it goes off of the current conversations to what we think we will have available to put into the program between now and the end of fiscal 26. So looking at about $702 million worth of project costs for those projects other than the 4. We have about $957 million each in terms of revenues. And we have other costs other than those that are associated with the projects. We have costs associated with some of the remaining safety projects. So that's an exercise. We've got environmental and economic vitality projects, a number of quite a number of smaller projects, and then some larger wildlife projects that are in there, and then the ongoing efforts of the Main Street Business Assistance Program that supports the roadway development program, and then transit and the debt service. The debt service, we still have 2 outstanding bonds that are out there. So all told, we're looking at somewhere in the area of about $21 million that we're still showing as being short, but recognizing that we made a tremendous amount of headway towards getting that narrowed. At the board meeting, Mayor Romero would want to check Supervisor Scott seconded, basically acknowledged the delay of those 2 additional projects in the city, Houghton Road Stage 8, 22nd Street Stage 3, and felt that it was in alignment with Jim Maxwell's motion in January. The board expressed its commitment to completing all of the RTA projects, and that we also, they also acknowledged that the city was taking the position that it was going to have all these projects finished, and then finally left open the discussion about additional funding beyond 2026, basically stating that we need to finish the projects and that will be whatever we need to do with other once that happens. That's my kind of very casual summary of what's there. With that, Mr. Chair, that's really the essence of my report, and open it up for the discussion. Other thoughts on that?
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add to that was the memo that I sent out provides 1.45 billion, and that accommodates funding for any rollover from current plan to the next plan for that reason.
Oh, 150. I think it's 150.
Yes, that's built into that 1.4.
Jim, so yeah, I think your synopsis is pretty spot on. The question that I have is I think that Mayor Romero also asked about North First, and we're ready to go on the piece that we are kind of going back and forth on. Where are we with getting an authorization to move that forward?
Mr. Chair, I believe where we stand right now is at the point where we have to decide what kind of additional public outreach we want to do to affirm the work that it's already done so far. That I believe would be something that the RTA would be initiating. We've not done that yet. The cost estimates that we have included in this process have all been associated with 4-lane divided north of First Avenue, and so we've through our TNC process earlier, we identified that we believe that from a technical standpoint, the 4-lane project works. So it would be a matter of making sure that everybody's comfortable with making that departure from the scope, and that's really
So as I recall, the motion that was made from the TMC to the board was specific about follow the same process we did on Broadway, and whatever additional public outreach the RTA thinks needs to be done, then we need to do it. I don't know that it was a requirement that we go out as much as we wanted to make sure that the Broadway process was followed. And John, I think you and Curtis were the two that were really talking through that. But we're ready to move, and with as much attention as we've got on these things, I think we need to move that. So if that needs to happen to be consistent with Broadway, then we need to get that done. And again, that was our recommendation for it. More can just say, hey, go do it and we're done. And I'm ready. But I just wanted to make sure that you all are clear on that.
So the discussion with the board back in June, then again in August, and most recently was to really address moving of the projects and the 4 projects, so that the focus was to really try to make sure we identify those 4 projects that are moving forward. Now that's been decided, then we can come back and now proceed with the remaining projects that First Avenue is on that list.
Okay, so I guess I'll ask again, when are we going to be able to move that? I'm ready to start the.
Yeah, we'll be happy to sit down and have that conversation. I think if you recall, there was a discussion on regional drainage funding with the meeting that we had. We discussed, let's identify how we're going to resolve that portion. And I think Sam and you were both at that meeting. So as long as we can answer some of those questions, then we can come back and proceed.
So, my frustration is we've lost several months now. We're ready to go, and the team. My nervousness for the team, quite frankly, is our ability to deliver. And this project had gone through very significant public outreach. We went through a lot of generations. Your staff was aware, and we're still messing around with it. And I want to go on record as saying that really is a concern. And I think that we need to move on getting that delivered. So whatever that looks like, and whatever pieces need to happen, then we need to get that done. Post haste.
Mr. Chairman, I guess just thinking back on the project review task force that Kurt and I and others served on, really, to me, in retrospect, our focus should have been more on the technical capabilities of the change, and we probably overstepped ourselves by getting further into the public involvement part of it. But so I guess I'm just here to say it's up to others to decide whether there is a need for more public involvement. But I think technically it's a solid option to move forward with.
Okay, John, go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. 2 meetings ago, I brought this up and we discussed that there probably wasn't more outreach that was needed for First Avenue. So with that being said, does the RTA board need to take direction, give us direction to begin design? Because I wasn't clear based on the dialogue we just had, what's the next step? Or can RTA go ahead and initiate that public outreach process now? If I could just have a little more clarity on that.
It still requires RTA board action, and TMC's recommendation was to proceed with additional outreach. So that's the recommendation that's on the table for the board to consider. And again, the board's focus really was on how do we balance this budget and removing the 4 projects. So now that's been decided. I think it's time to go back and continue the conversation with the board.
John, and maybe you can help me. Memory's getting foggy these days. I thought that the discussion was more outreach if needed based on the Broadway. We were really focused on similarities to the Broadway and the change of Broadway, not necessarily go out and do more outreach. It was really more follow that process. If you've already done enough, then we're good.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure we clarify that it's not necessarily more outreach. It's follow that process. I think that's it. So what I'll do is I'll ask Mayor Romero to ask the chair for an agenda item to move this forward so that we can get it done, because we got to move this.
Yeah. Again, going back to Sam's question, it does require board's action. So that's our intent.
I'll ask the mayor to bring that up at the next board.
One last question, Mr. Chair. So based on what John just mentioned, do we still believe that more outreach is needed? Can we change the TMC change that recommendation ahead of the next RTA board meeting?
Or Mr. Chair, can we clarify? I think we thought it was permissive. At least the direction I felt was that if people wanted to do more outreach, not mandating that they do such. So if we need a motion, perhaps to clarify that, it's just.
This is agendized as and make a recommendation. So if the committee would feel comfortable with making a recommendation to clarify that so that it's crystal clear what that intent is, I think that's appropriate.
Mr. Bernal, if that's consistent with what he thought, again.
It is, and I would so move.
Why don't you, if you don't mind, articulate that?
I would,
All clear.
I would move that we advance to the RTA board the project on First Avenue from the city of Tucson that has without without the need for additional public input unless the RTA board so believes.
Second.
There's a motion on a second. Further discussion on that? Hearing none, call for the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries, so it'll be on the agenda. Thank you, appreciate that. Anything else on that? Any other questions for Jim? Thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. Future agenda items? Any future agenda items? Seeing none, you stand adjourned promptly at 10:28. Appreciate everybody's time. Thanks for being here. We'll see you in December, second Wednesday.
Second Wednesday of the month at 9 a.m.
We need to say goodbye.
I was gonna give him the floor. Say goodbye to Jim. Gonna give him the floor, but.